We're very happy to have you here.
That was nice. That was very nice.
So we're going to start with a few questions about the film that we've all just watched, and then a little bit about this whole question of filmmaking and political activism together. And of course, we'll take questions from the audience before we leave. I guess my first question is, why this film now?
Well, that's the perfect question. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I wanted to make this film right after the invasion of Iraq. This is now, back in 2003, and I was of draft age, during the Vietnam War, and I was against that war, and I just couldn't believe that in my lifetime we were going to war again based on a lie, and it was just very, very disturbing. And there's a line in the film where James Marsden, who plays Warren Strobel, he says, it feels like you feel like your child is running into the street, and as a parent, you're helpless to save him from being hit by the truck. And that's the way I felt about it. As we marched to war, I thought, this is crazy. I mean, we knew there was no connection between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. We knew there was no way that those aluminum tubes could enhance uranium. And we also knew that there had been no evidence that said there was weapons of mass destruction. I mean, if you remember, Hans Blix, the UN weapons inspector, was coming back every month or so and saying, we haven't found anything. So it made absolutely no sense. And I had read the Project for the New American Century, which was written by a number of neocons. I think it was a paper for the American Enterprise Institute, where they talked about what America being the last remaining superpower, what would they do with this power in terms of spreading democracy? And they had talked about going into Iraq in the Middle East and figuring out a way to put a Western-style democracy in the Middle East. Hopefully it would proliferate and then help Israel and spread democracy. And it just seemed insane to me, because anybody who's studied, I used to make the joke, didn't anybody watch Lawrence of Arabia? I mean, we all knew that, you look at that region and they're not countries, they're arbitrary countries that were carved up after the First World War by the British and the French, and there had been this sectarian division in the Islamic world between the Muslims, between the Sunni and the Shia, based on who was the rightful heir to Muhammad, and that had been going on for 1,400 years. So we knew that if you took the iron fist of Saddam out of the mix, what would happen? And of course, that is what happened. So it was like frustrating. I mean, it was like I wanted to do something, and initially I thought as a satire. I mean, my mind went to a satire because it seemed also preposterous to me, and I thought maybe like a Dr. Strangelove, do that kind of a film. And I worked with Larry Gelbart, who was a brilliant writer, and he did MASH and Tootsie and all this. And we couldn't get a script that I really was happy with. Then I tried again as a dramatic film, and that didn't work. And then many years later, I saw this documentary by Bill Moyers, and his quote, as you remember, is at the beginning of the film. He talks about, a democracy can't survive without a free and independent press. And in this documentary, he had these 4 journalists who worked for Knight Ridder, and they had gotten it all right. Everything that I had been thinking about was laid out in these articles. I never read them. I never was aware of them. And I thought, oh, okay, that's the way into this story. Here's a bunch of people who are working so hard to get the truth out, and they can't break through. So it turns out that we're in this state now in this country where the truth is really under attack, and the free press is under attack, and it's being called the enemy of the people. And this is a very frightening time. So hopefully it'll resonate in a way that people will say, whether or not our democracy survives is going to be dependent in a large part on whether or not we have a free press that can communicate to the truth. And the one line, which was a line that was not in the original script, because all of the journalists, the 4 journalists, they worked very closely with us. They read every draft of the script. They were on the set when we were shooting. And the line that my character, John Walcott, delivers in the film, where he says, you know, when the government says something, you only have one question to ask: is it true? That wasn't in the script. But the day we were shooting, John Landay, who's one of the, you know, played by Woody Harrelson, he said, you know, you got to have the speech that John gave to us in the press room when we were starting to doubt whether or not our articles were true. And the speech that John gave was virtually verbatim for what he told. And I just took it down, I wrote it down and learned it, and we shot it. So that, to me, is the essence of everything we're facing now. Are people going to be held accountable? And I do think that we do have the press, a big chunk of the press is working very, very hard right now to expose the truth. But unfortunately, it's running up against another big chunk of the press, which basically speaks to 40 to 45% of this country, and they're getting lies, they're getting propaganda. Every administration uses propaganda. Republicans, Democrats, whether they're going to sell a policy or they're going to sell a rationale for going to war. But this is the first time in American history where you have essentially state-run television being a propaganda arm of an administration. And that makes it very difficult for the free and honest press to try to break through to that big chunk of the public. And we were talking backstage about the creeping fascism that you see in America now, and the playbook is being played out. And the first thing is to co-opt the media, and then hopefully you start attacking the justice system and you start co-opting the courts. And these kinds of things are happening now. So we're, you know, this is a crucial flex point at whether or not this democracy survives. So we hope that we can keep going, and hopefully the real, the honest, the non-fake news, because we know who those other people are, we know who they are, and we know what they're doing. And you know, we see it playing out in the border dispute. Michelle and I, Michelle, are you in the audience? Where are you? There she is, right there. That's my wife, Michelle. She was one of the producers on the film. And we just came back from El Paso. We went down to the border, El Tornillo, and you can see the policies being played out, that kind of fascism that's being played out in public policy. And now we've got a new Supreme Court justice possibly. It's very frightening. It's a very frightening time, and we have to all be vigilant. We have to be strong, because there's no guarantees that democracy survives. There's no guarantees. Democracy is an idea, you know, and it's only as good as the people who live up to the pillars of it that are laid out in the Constitution. And if you start messing with that, it can go a different way. So anyway, that's hopefully what the film is about and what it'll speak to people, and hopefully people will see it. But more important than that, than the film, is that we all have to be vigilant. We really do, in order to keep this thing going.
Now, you... You mentioned an adjustment that was made to the screenplay, and I should underline, it's Joey Hartstone who wrote this script.
Yeah.
Also the screenwriter for the previous film, LBJ,
right,
that starred Woody Harrelson. So at least two questions along these lines. We know that this is based on the true story of the 4 journalists, yes, but you're not making a documentary. You are making a fiction film that's very much in the mold of classic Hollywood political films. I was curious, what was fictionalized?
Nothing.
For example,
nothing.
The story
nothing.
Of Warren,
Warren
Strobel.
and his wife at a mixer. They got married. They are currently walking the Appalachian Trail. They do it every year. And it's all true. We didn't make anything up. Here's the thing, and this is really a very upsetting thing to me, and something that I care deeply about. People get their history through films, a lot of it. A filmmaker has a responsibility. If you're going to make a film about a historical event, you better be as accurate as you possibly can. If you don't know what happened, you might be able to fill it in, just like any good historian will do. They'll write a book about Lincoln or Jefferson or Adams, whatever, and you get as much information as you can. I had the actual people who lived this life, who went through it. Now, we took a tiny license in the fact that it wasn't just the Philadelphia Inquirer that didn't run their stories. A number of the Knight Ridder papers didn't run their stories. But the Philadelphia Inquirer was the flagship paper, and John Walcott butted heads with him. He went there, and he did talk to him. And so these things are happening, you know? I mean, I want people to watch this and say, I want to know if I'm seeing this, I want to know that this is true. I don't make it up, because if you make it up, then you're bastardizing history. I had a big problem when I made Ghosts of Mississippi. If you want to know what happened in the re-investigation and the re-prosecution of Byron de la Beckwith, you can watch that film, because 94% is true. I can tell you the two things that aren't true, but they are. One is, well, I mean, they are in that, you know, one is when they had the prosecution, Alec Baldwin was the main DA, and he, in the film, he questions all the witnesses. Well, there was one other DA there, too, who questioned some of those witnesses. That's one thing. The other thing is I asked Bobby DeLauder, the DA, I said, because Byron de la Beckwith didn't take the witness stand in that trial. This was the third trial. The first two had ended in hung juries, and in those trials, he did take the witness stand, because never, up until the time Beckwith was found guilty, no white man had ever been convicted of killing a black man in the state of Mississippi. None. None. Okay, so in the third trial, he didn't take the witness stand. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because you've got the protagonist and the antagonist, and in a courtroom drama like we did with Few Good Men, you want the two of them to go at each other, so you have that great moment. But it didn't happen. And I wrestled with it, and I said, you know something? I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't put him on the witness stand because it didn't happen. But I asked Bobby DeLauder, I said, at any time during the trial, did you come in contact with Byron de la Beckwith? And he said, yes, there was a time. I said, what was it? He says, we met each other in a bathroom during a break. I said, okay. What happened during that? And he told me the exchange. And the exchange was, and we amplified it, but basically it's the subtext of everything that was in the exchange. Beckwith comes in there and he says, how do you think it's going for you, son? And Bobby says, well, we'll find out soon enough. And then he said, that we will, son, that we will. And all that meant to me was, you can't get me. I'm white, and I killed a black man, and you're never going to get me. And that was the scene, and we put that scene in the film, but that's it. So that's why I think it's important. I think it's really important. People are going to see this. They want to know, did anybody did anybody get the truth about Iraq? Well, yeah, these four guys did. They did. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And especially because the two films that you made back-to-back share the star and the screenwriter and you. Do you feel a connection between this and LBJ? In other words, they obviously take place at a very different moment in history with very different leadership. But were you drawn to these two projects for very similar reasons?
Well, no, I wasn't drawn. I mean, the LBJ I was drawn to. This was of my creation. I mean, Joey Hartstone did write the screenplay, and on every film, I do a ton of writing with them, and we work together and all that. But this was something I wanted to make, like I say, from 2003 on. So, I picked this. LBJ kind of picked me, and I was very reluctant to do LBJ. I didn't. Like I say, I was of draft age, and I hated Lyndon Johnson. I mean, he was like my enemy. I mean, the guy could send me to my death, and I didn't want to have anything. But I started reading up about him, and as I gotten older, I've spent a lot of time in not only politics, but in government. I ran a state commission in California for 7 years on early childhood, and I oversaw a program for early childhood. It was just like a $700 million a year budget, and I worked very closely with the governor and with the legislature, and I learned about the nexus between politics, policy, and government, and how things get implemented, and how they, they play out. Unlike the guy who's in the White House now doesn't have a clue and doesn't want to know. But there is something to know about all that, and I thought about LBJ, and I realized that, yes, I hated him for those reasons, but he also was, after FDR, he was the greatest domestic legislator in American history. When you look at what he was able to accomplish with the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, I mean, the amount of legislation that he got passed was extraordinary. And I said, who is this guy? I wanted to know, who is this guy? He's a guy that I hate, but he's the guy that was able to accomplish. He was a political animal. And as I dug into it, I saw a lot of different sides to him that I wasn't aware of. And I read this book by Doris Kearns Goodwin. I mean, I read all the Caro books, and they're, if you're interested in LBJ, I mean, he's the, preeminent, biographer of LBJ, and they're great books. I mean, you get all the information. But this one thing I saw in the Doris Kearns Goodwin book was he was very insecure. He had a recurring dream that he was paralyzed, and he was very doubtful of his mother's love for him. She withheld her love. It was conditional if he was doing the things that, that she wanted him to do. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting thing. You always think about LBJ as this kind of tough as nails, bull in the china shop kind of guy. But he was, frightened many times and incredibly insecure and feeling at times unloved. And when he went up against the Kennedy, he felt there's no way I can. So I thought that's interesting. And Woody Harrelson, I had to convince him to do it because he hated him too. Yeah. But we started reading, and he says, okay, I can see the human side to this guy, aside from the fact that we'd hated the Vietnam policy. So that was something that I had to really wrestle with. Wasn't sure I was going to make that movie, and I'm glad I did because I learned a lot about somebody that I had a different view of.
Right. And also, working with Woody Harrelson in that film, I presume, also gave you a kind of basis, a shorthand to work with him here. Obviously, this is more of an ensemble piece because there are at least 4 or 5 characters that we're following. But it does lead me to the question of casting this film. There's a moment where Walcott is trying to get Galloway to come back and work at Knight Ridder, and the way that you and Tommy Lee Jones played the scene, I almost had a feeling that it was like you, Rob Reiner, convincing Tommy Lee Jones to play a role in this film.
There was a little of that. He's a great actor, obviously, but he doesn't just jump into things. He has to be sure. And I sent him the script. I had many conversations with him, and he said, yes, I want to be part of this because of what this movie says. And to be honest, I wasn't supposed to play the Walcott part. It was one of the strangest things I've ever been through. We had cast Alec Baldwin, and we rearranged the entire schedule for him so he could leave on a Friday to come back to New York to be able to do Saturday Night Live, to do Trump. And he had just had a baby, and we had been shooting for a week. I'd been shooting with Woody and with Tommy Lee Jones and everybody, and he was supposed to come in on the Monday. It was a Saturday. He had just had a baby, and I get a call from his agent saying he's not doing the film. He's dropping out. I said, what? What are you talking about? I shot for a week here. He's supposed to shoot Monday. What am I going to do? I can't find anybody. So Michelle says to me, why don't you play the part? I said, I don't know. I mean, I don't like acting and directing. It's a split focus. You know, I'm better whether I'm just acting or just directing. Anyway, I said, I looked around. I was available, so that helped. And I knew I would work cheap. But Michelle gave me the one bit of direction that I tried to live up to, and that is, I'm playing this character, John Walcott, and she said to me, try to be a little less Jewish. So, I don't know if I succeeded, but I tried.
Yeah.
I tried to tamp down the Jew, if I could.
Well, there's a wonderful moment when one of them is in your office, and it's right after they learn that Wolsey is going to Europe to find more information. And you just go,
yeah.
And I felt for a second that might be related to the sign of a good director who understatedly is telling his actors what they need to do, not showing, not forcing, but go do what you got to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was conscious.
Well, I did. They're just instinctive things that you do. I did that with it, like, go ahead, get on, because I was working. And then one time he came in and he said he had, and I went like this, I'm like, okay,
exactly,
now go ahead and write that story. So they're just instinctive things that came up when we were shooting. I didn't think about it ahead of time.
Now, did anything change in the way that you were directing, say, James Marsden, Woody Harrelson, Tommy Jones, once you switched from being merely the director to, well, I'm going to call it the director within the frame, because that's what an editor is in a newspaper office.
It's a terrible job. I don't like that, because if you're a good actor doesn't watch what the other performers are doing. You listen to the person and you react, and you want to be in the scene, with them, and not think about, where the camera is or where, what they're doing. But I had to run. I mean, Michelle would stand at the monitor, and after the take, I would run to and I also don't like looking at myself on screen, because, if I looked like Brad Pitt, then I would run to the monitor. But then I wouldn't have to be worrying about being less Jewish either. But I had to run to the monitor every time between to say, okay, that's all right, that's fine, and like that. So it's not the best way to do it. You got to focus on your own thing.
Now, I also want to get to this question because I had asked in advance of tonight whether there were particular films, American mainstream movies, that take on political issues that you had seen earlier that may have inspired your choice of material and the way that you make films. And the first one that you mentioned that I got through the publicist was The Best Man. And I confess to everybody here, I had never seen this film of 1964 that was written by Gore Vidal, adapted from his own play, directed by Franklin Schaffner, and starring the embodiment of integrity in 1950s, 60s Hollywood, Henry Fonda, as a political candidate. And my husband, Mark, had seen it many times, but he sat me down in front of the DVD to make sure that I would get all of it. And it blew me away.
How many people have seen it? So there's
Not enough.
A few. It's a
get.
brilliant, brilliant film. I mean, it's all about the nominating process at a Democratic convention. And you got to see it, because, I mean, even though it was done in 1964, it still works today.
Was there something particular about that film, whether it was the story, the dialogue? By the way, some of the dialogue from Gore Vidal is just so savvy, so crackling that I wrote down some of the lines.
Yeah.
But first, I mean, did seeing that film help to solidify in your own mind that you wanted to do something in that vein?
Well, when I saw the film, I was pretty young, and I wasn't thinking about that. I mean, I'm just looking at films that I'm drawn to, I mean, for instance, I've only made one thriller, which was Misery, but I love thrillers, I just love them. I love Hitchcock, I love all that stuff, and I just never made them. This film, though, I mean, when I saw it, there's certain times you will see a film and you go, wow, that's just incredible. I mean, Face in the Crowd is another one by Elia Kazan. It's a great film, and you go, ooh, gee, that's a terrific. I don't think about, is that's what I want to do so much as they inspire you. You get inspired by it. And then, when you get into making a particular film, like I said, when I did Misery, I'll watch all of Hitchcock films. When I do a political film, I'll watch The Candidate over again. I'll watch, Best Man or All the President's Men. I watch them because they're great films and they inspire you.
And also, I think a lot of them deal with the underlying human elements that are part of politics, part of filmmaking, part of culture, manipulation, negotiation. I mean, obviously, the whole story of LBJ is very different from what we watch now. That would be true of The Best Man and All the President's Men. How do you control people, whether it is outright fascistic manipulation or some kind of savvy, genial leading individuals to what you really want them to do? I think this underlies a few of the films that you've loved and the films that you've made. The American President, more comic way deals with it too. But just to give you an idea of how topical I think The Best Man is, thanks to you, I watched it and took notes. At one point, Henry Fonda's character says to Cliff Robertson, his opponent for the nomination, and it's clear that Robertson's character will stoop to any kind of smear tactics, anything to get what he wants.
Yeah, he's basically a red baiter. Yeah. He's like a McCarthy kind of guy who I'll get a communist, there's always a communist, and I'll do anything to root them out. And Henry Fonda is like an Adlai Stevenson, very intellectual, thoughtful, doesn't, pull the trigger quick enough. Anyway, go ahead.
And at one point, towards the end, Fonda says to Robertson, because you have no sense of responsibility toward anyone or anything, and that is a tragedy in a man and a disaster in a president.
Yeah.
It's that.
Yeah. No, that kind of line, I mean, there are certain things in that film and in any film, you see a certain line, you go, wow, that's an amazing bit of dialogue. And that one resonates today, but there's another speech in that has stuck with me my whole life, and that is, there's a character in it like a Harry Truman, a former president, and both...
Lee Tracy, somebody just said that.
Yeah, Lee Tracy.
Exactly.
Lee Tracy.
Of course you knew
right.
that.
Okay. So, and the point is, both Henry Fonda and Cliff Robertson are trying to get his endorsement because his endorsement means so much. And he has a meeting with Henry Fonda, and he talks about his faults and how he doesn't act quick enough. You got to be more assertive. And then he goes to Cliff Robertson, and who's this, like I say, tough, brash, commie catcher. And he says to Cliff Robertson, he says, "Let me ask you something, Joe." He says, "Do you think the ends justify the means?" And he says, "I do, sir, I do." He says, "Well, let me tell you something, Joe. There are no ends, only means." And I thought of that, and I said, that's it. There are no ends, only means. And so it's about life. It's about the doing of something. If you're thinking about only what you want to get to, then you are not living the process. You're not experiencing the process. And that's what we have now in the White House. We have somebody who only thinks about himself, his money, his fame, his whatever, and he'll do whatever it takes to get there. And the means the means are strewn on the battlefield dead, and so.
I'm going to extend the question slightly because this is also kind of means and ends. Do you believe that movies can make a difference? I mean, I know that the making of a movie, the watching of it, the sharing of it, that's a means perhaps and an end. But is there, do you think, some palpable way that a film like The Best Man or All the President's Men or Shock and Awe, do you believe they can make a difference politically?
Well, I think it is pretty presumptuous to think that a film would in any kind of way profoundly change anything. I think the most you can hope for with a film is to add to the dialogue, you know, to be part of the dialogue so that it gets people talking in a certain way. I mean, it's the same thing when we did with All in the Family. It wasn't like we were going to end racism, clearly, you know. I mean, but you know, you're hoping to add to the dialogue. I can think of one film, and I'm sure there are others. I'm sure there are others because, and you probably know more than I do, but there was a film called I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang with Paul Muni. And it actually changed the prison system. True. That film actually changed the prison system. So there you go. There you go. On a documentary that was on recently, Jinxed, that changed something. A man got indicted and now he's being tried for murder. I mean, so things do happen like that, but it's rare. I mean, hopefully you just want to be part of the dialogue.
I mean, I too believe, and I teach film history at Columbia, and I try somehow to not only show great movies, but to raise questions about values and behavior and the constant interchange between motion pictures and social life. I think the most we can ever hope for or assume is perception. In other words, if a film can affect the perception and change our minds to open up our thought process about either a political issue, a social issue, that becomes political if enough people start to think, talk, and act. So it's never on the level of, yeah, it's going to translate into votes at the booth, but it can be on the level of, wait a minute, I never thought of LBJ in terms of that. Or, wait a minute, Knight Ridder papers, newspapers and the White House, that happened then, so what's happening now? It raises questions as opposed to providing complacent answers. I mean, social media is increasingly, I think, providing weapons of mass distraction, to quote Frank Rich when he wrote back in the New York Times, especially Twitter. And I'm wondering if you consciously hope that a film like Shock and Awe can be an antidote. In other words, you know, is this something that is supposed to feed into the need for vigilance, for skepticism?
Well, I think it does, but I think the consumer of news today has a very, very tough job because of social media, and it's a glib thing to say weapons of mass distraction, but the truth is they are weapons of mass destruction. They are those because, and the Soviet Union did it for years. Now Russia is doing it. They understand how to weaponize this stuff and how to use it in a way that can hack not only the information from the DNC or John Podesta, but can hack into your mind in a way that will get you to think in a certain way. I mean, these are what they call active measures, disinformation campaigns. They've been doing it for years. We've been doing it in America and in other countries, but it's weaponized now because of social media. And I don't think we yet know how to manage it or how to curate it in such a way that we're getting information that is good information as opposed to bad information. And I think, you know, a lot of these young guys, and you saw this guy from Cambridge Analytica, the kid with the red hair, I forget his name, Chris something, I can't forget his name. Anyway, he came forward because he realized what was happening. And I think so many young people who are technologically savvy and come up with all kinds of applications, apps that are used throughout the internet, I don't think they know what the power of these things are when they invent them. It's like you've got a whole generation of Albert Einsteins who are really now regretting that they invented the atom bomb. And they're running around going, how do we fix this now? What do we do? The difference is you don't have to drop the atom bomb. But this is out there now, and it's out there in the atmosphere, and much of it is poisonous. And so what's the antidote to that? Except to be vigilant and really it takes a lot more time and effort to be a good civic person now than it did a long time ago. So
there's one, I think, particularly redolent thing that your character Walcott does in this film, in telling the reporters to check more sources. It's not enough to have one, it's not enough to have two, three. In other words, searching out the truth and insisting that there be multiple corroborations. That seems like a message that one can take from a newspaper office into daily life, because I think all of us, and maybe you want to talk about this, aren't we all these days increasingly subject to confirmation bias? In other words, we're more likely to listen to and watch those news reports that confirm our basic opinions anyway. And there's less likelihood that we engage with the other side. So
right. Well, that's true, and I think that you want to trust certain sources that information sources that are practicing good journalism, and that doesn't mean it has to be a liberal paper or a conservative paper, because there are good conservative papers that practice that as well. They have a point of view, but they're not going to put out some insane crackpot thing. And that's the problem, because you've got, don't kid yourself. Alex Jones has an enormous reach. An enormous reach. And so that's out there. And, we used to say, well, you can't believe everything you read in the paper, which is true. You can't. You have to have a couple of different sources that you read, and you check something else. And that person's saying it, that person's saying it. But now it's all reading. It's all out there. And there's thousands and thousands of sites and blogs and things. And so just because it's written down, that's the really tough thing about this. I don't have the answer. I really don't have the answer. I think people just have to be vigilant, because listen, the New York Times didn't get it right on Iraq. The Washington Post didn't get it right. They don't always get it right. And so as citizens, we have to just be extra vigilant to say, wait a minute. There's an article I read there that said that those aluminum tubes can't be used for enriching uranium. Wait a minute, what is that? And then check back with something else you've read and say, is that true? It's very tricky. Very tricky.
No, I agree. I think that the one good thing about the technological, increasingly sophisticated ways in which the news is presented, personally, to be honest with people, I don't really read that many newspapers or watch that many news shows, but I am sort of addicted late at night to the satirists. I watch what I call the Kinder of Jon Stewart. So I'm watching Trevor Noah and Stephen Colbert and Samantha Bee and John Oliver, because in their satire, which often utilizes clips, they tend to show you the lies that underlie some of the news that's coming out. And I start to just, in my laughter, but it's also just a way of keeping sane sometimes, I appreciate that I'm getting a proliferation of stuff that their staff was able to find at a moment's notice, because the entire data bank exists of what people actually said and may now be trying to hide.
That's exactly right. And I think they did a study when Jon Stewart was on the air, that people who watch Jon Stewart are much better informed than anybody who's watching anything else. Because the truth of the matter is, satirists may not say what you should be for, but they'll definitely tell you what to be against. And they are the most brilliant observers of the social fabric, the political fabric of our life. And if you listen to a good satirist, they'll tell you, they'll point to, that's wrong, that's a lie. They'll tell you it's a lie. Now, they won't tell you what the truth is, because they aren't in that game. But I mean, it is a great way to learn to get your news. It really is.
Okay, we're going to take some questions, because we don't have that much time left, and I know that some of you have direct things. I have many more questions for Rob Reiner, but I don't think I'm going to use all that time for myself. Right there, yes. The question has to do with...
You're talking about the Iraq War? The Iraq War? Yeah.
That the New York... I'm sorry, I just have to repeat the question, because I'm sure not everybody heard. It's okay.
Yeah.
That given how the New York Times, the Washington Post, certainly with the Vietnam War, were able to follow the story and publish the truth. And now again, but how did it happen that the New York Times got it so wrong in terms of the Iraq War?
Okay, and the reason, and it's very different from Vietnam. The country was divided during Vietnam, and a lot of people, didn't believe in the domino theory. A lot of people did, and so there was back and forth. But with Iraq, we had just been attacked. 9/11 had happened. The country was traumatized, and there was a tremendous amount of patriotism. We talk about it in the film. And I think a lot of people didn't want to seem like they were being unpatriotic to go against the administration during that time. And, they bought the Kool-Aid. And the truth of the matter is, the people like the Judy Miller and certain people were getting information from the upper echelons of the Bush administration, and a lot from Ahmed Chalabi, who was a fraud. But as the journalist said, they were getting it from lower level sources, people who were willing to speak out and tell them the truth. So they had a better handle on it. But a lot of it is about access, and we talk about that too. They don't want to lose access. You're seeing for the first time now in that press briefing room, and Michelle and I have been screaming about this forever. Why don't they just say, that's a lie? What you just said is a lie. They're starting to do that. They're starting to do that because they know that, they want to be respectful. They want to be invited back. They want to have access. They don't want to lose access. Well, yeah.
But how about today? The press, the media did not vet this guy in the White House.
Bingo. He said the media did not vet this guy in the White House. And this is an important thing that you just brought up. When the press sees something that's already happening, like Watergate is unfolding, or the Vietnam War, it is actually happening, they will become vigilant and say, the press is all over this conflict at the border. They're all over it. Because they see it's bad, it's wrong. Two things happened during the run-up during the campaign, and it's really important. And one is they didn't think Trump was going to get the nomination, and they didn't think he was going to win. But once he had the nomination, I guarantee you, if we saw as much space in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all television media, if we saw as much time devoted to emails as to this one story, because that's all that was, is one story. Email, 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 that's it, one story. And if I told you there's a man running for president who defrauds people out of their life savings, so much so that they enact a class action suit and he has to pay $25 million that doesn't even come out of his own pocket but comes from other people's money, goes into his foundation, and he pays $25 million. And you heard that every single day. I guarantee you that man would not be president. Look what happened to Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney had Bain Capital, which was like child's play compared to this. And the press didn't do their due diligence. And I blame the press. I blame the Russians. I blame Comey for leaking emails. I mean, bringing up that thing. There's a lot of reasons why it happened, and that's why we are where we are. And the press got us into Iraq. And so we got to hold people accountable. We just have to keep vigilant here.
We keep saying fourth estate, but they're not doing their job.
They are now.
We keep saying the fourth estate.
But they're not doing their job now. They are doing it right now. But unfortunately, they're doing it now when there's, like I say, 40% of the American public is getting mainstream media pounded into them with crap and lies. And that's the problem. So even though they are doing their job now, they're butting up against it. And the bully pulpit of the president who lies literally every time he opens his mouth.
There's a gentleman here, woman here, and gentleman there.
Mr. Reiner, thank you very much. I teach high school journalism.
Thank you. I teach high school journalism.
And we're seeing a resurgence of activism, signs of activism among young people.
And we're seeing a resurgence of activism among young people.
What advice do you have to young people, teenagers and young adults who may want to go into journalism, into politics and government, or into other civil service?
What advice do you have for young people who might want to go into journalism, politics, government, civil service?
Watch what David Hogg is doing. Watch what he's doing. That kid is a genius. I mean, you want to learn about how to affect change and how you go about it. First of all, young people know how to use social media. They know it. They know how to do it. So, if they have a desire, I mean, there's plenty of organizations they can join, and right now it's just about getting people out to vote, because in order to hold this criminal, he's a criminal, accountable. In order to hold him accountable, we're going to have to take back the House and maybe the Senate. And in order to do that, we're going to have to overcome gerrymandering. We're going to have to overcome, the state-run media, and we're going to have to overcome a lot. I mean, there's a tremendous amount we have to overcome in order to make that happen. We can still do it because we're in the majority. We're in the vast majority. But we got to come out in bigger numbers than ever before in order to counteract the other one is voter suppression. All of those things, we have to be so strong. And look at where you had this great win in the Bronx and Queens, That was that's an amazing win. That's where America's going, We may not be there yet because it's New York City, but we're moving in that direction. We are moving in that direction. And, those people are holding on for dear life to some kind of white nationalist America that they think that we have, but we're changing. This country is changing, and it's good. It's good. It makes us stronger and richer and more powerful. And we're going to have to fight that. We're going to have to fight that.
Woman here. Wait, I'm going to stop for 1 second just to make sure that people can hear this. That even though there is this proliferation of social media, this is a problem that perhaps goes way further back to the 50s, a time when, for example, Madison Avenue advertising was already making inroads politically, and where Kennedy won partly because the televised debate made Nixon look less good. And the business model of the internet is based on advertising.
So is the business model of TV. And Warhol predicted that TV would run our lives, but instead something more sophisticated has run it. So this president has taken it full circle and has continued to run our lives because we're lulled by just the way we were in the 50s by TV. Now it's the internet. Big mistakes are higher, and now he has on TV and the internet. Reality TV.
Right.
We are tuning in to find out what's going to come, and that's why he drops these bombs.
Right. And it did.
Okay.
It did start in the 50s. It did start in the 50s, but it's weaponized now. She's not going to remember everything you just said.
I'm not.
There's no chance.
I just wanted to make sure that everybody could hear the very articulate but lengthy question that has to do with the extent to which we are now, that it has come full circle because we've gone back to this model of watching on a set, but now it's not TV, it's the internet, but it's reality TV. In other words,
Yes, and what it is, the difference is, yes, there was always, through Mad Men and all that, and Bernays, who started the whole thing of modern advertising, getting inside your head and making you think that you should have bacon and eggs, even though they never went together. That is mind, working with your mind, but now it is exponential. It is so powerful. Andy Warhol said, everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame. And I don't know if you saw this documentary, We Live in Public, and the guy said he got it wrong. Everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame every day. Wow. And that's the difference. And so this social media is way more pervasive than anything that was on television or in billboards or anything like that.
I'm so sorry, it's just that we've got a few more questions that I've got. I had said yes to the gentleman back there and then here.
Are there individuals or situations of the last 500 days or so that would inspire you making another film?
Are there individuals or situations from the last 500 days or so that would inspire you to make a film?
Does he have an orange face? I think there are going to be some really great films made about what has happened here, but we're going to need some distance and some time to really understand it all. Right now, we are living in a reality television show, and it's not very real, except it is.
My question, I actually would like to hear you speak about what has happened in the Supreme Court. With Kennedy now retired, with what happened, I was speaking to these young ladies over here about what happened with the couple that wanted to have a cake made. Because I read on the internet recently that Mississippi, dear old Mississippi, has passed a law now allowing people who have religious objections to discriminate against people. Knowing from my own background, my own history, as an African-American black person, how that tide can be turned.
It can be. Now, here's...
It seems to me that we're now in this place.
Yes.
Where Plessy versus Ferguson can once again become the law.
Right.
And I just wanted to hear what you had to say.
Well,
We'll hear the question.
he's saying that with with Kennedy retiring and the possibility of a big shift in the Supreme Court, what is that going to do to existing decisions, and how will it? Roe versus Wade is right there up on the top of the list. Michelle and I were talking about this right before we got here. She and I and two other people were the first people to file a federal lawsuit to establish marriage equality. And it got to the Supreme Court. It got to the Supreme Court, and we won, and it paved the way for marriage equality. We had meetings with ACLU. This is early on when we were thinking about filing. With the ACLU, Lambda Legal. These are people who have been fighting in the trenches for these gay rights for many, many years. And they said, no, don't go ahead with this. Don't do it. You're going to set back this movement decades, and we need to do it on an incremental basis, state by state, and it might take 8 or 10 years. If we had waited, look what could have happened. And the point is with all this, we looked at that Supreme Court. We saw the makeup of that Supreme Court, and we made a political calculation. When we had we had Ted Olson and David Boies fighting for us. We'd taken all the politics out of it. We said, okay, we're making an argument for one person, Anthony Kennedy. We knew we weren't going to get the other 4 votes, and we knew we had our 4 votes. But we also knew that Anthony Kennedy had voted twice for gay rights in Lawrence v. Texas and Romer in Colorado. And that was the person we made the argument to, and that's how we won. Now, it's going to change dramatically if he's allowed to have a Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, Scalia type guy in there, and then God help us, man. God help us. We have to fight. That's and we were talking about this. Also, the fact that an illegitimate president gets a chance to make two appointments that are lifetime appointments. I mean, this is like we're hanging by a thread here. We got to fight this hard. But I'm seeing guys like Richard Blumenthal come out and say we're going to use every single trick and every single parliamentary procedure to keep that from happening. And maybe we can get 2 Republicans. Maybe 2 Republicans will stand up, because all we need is 2. 2. But it's scary. It is scary, man. Really scary. Yeah.
In the balcony, we can't see, but go right ahead and just yell.
So your movie deals with the purposeful deception by the administration that eventually led to the Iraq War, and yet we're dealing with an administration that lies on average of 6 times a day for their. But now we're also getting into a debate about civility. We have a president that demonizes the other side of the aisle every chance he gets, and yet when the other side of the aisle stands up and matches, maybe it's incivility, maybe it's standing up for their belief system, they're criticized and demonized. And I'm just wondering how you think political opposition should be handling a situation where they're, it used to be go low, they go low, you go high. Is that really what's going to work?
No, but what has to work is you have to be able to fight them hard on their level, but at the same time offer the alternative. It's not enough to just fight them hard down in the gutter, which you have to be able to do, but you also have to be able to show them an alternative. That's why Ocasio-Cortez won. She wasn't going after Trump. And this guy, young guy, Beto O'Rourke, I don't know if you know about him. He's down in Texas. Yeah, he's in Texas, and he's going after Cruz. He's only 5 points behind. He is also have a positive message and all of that. So don't take anything from them. Hit them back hard, but then come back with something that's positive and helpful. We have a harder job, because all they have to do is say, no, lower taxes, less government. That's all they say, and then they lie about everything. We have to actually say, this is what could be good for you if we do, and you have to explain it, and it's hard. So we have to find sharp ways of explaining what's good, why we need it, and then don't ever take the attack. Never let them up. You can't let them up. It's tough. We have a harder job.
This is going to be the last question. The person on the aisle there. Yes.
I know you were on John Fugelsang's podcast, and he said that, why don't you run for office? You said you poll like 40% of the family.
Yeah. I couldn't clear my own family.
In all seriousness, I don't know why you wouldn't, because you're knowledgeable on the issues. I've seen you on so many talk shows with Bill Maher. I follow you on Twitter. I mean, you know what you're talking about.
Well, the thing
This is the question about would
running
Rob
for
Reiner.
office. When you run for, here's the thing: you can get a lot done outside of elected office, and I'm fine. Over the years, I have found that I've been able to get way more done. Like, say, marriage equality. I passed a law in California that gave services to young children 0 to 5 in perpetuity, and you can get big things done. I saved a city in the Santa Monica Mountains, different things. As an elected official, it's tougher. There's a couple of jobs that are good, and I'm not exaggerating. President of the United States and Mayor of New York. I'm not kidding. Because the President of the United States has a lot of power, and the Mayor of New York, if you look at the city charter, also has a lot of power. So those two things. Even the Mayor of Los Angeles doesn't have power because they don't have the power over the education system. Those are the jobs, if you want to make a difference and do something, those are the jobs you'd run for. So, that's it. But I mean, I get a lot done without it. But listen, here's the thing. This is the honest truth. I could do that job. I know I can do that job. I know as much as anybody who's studied all this stuff and knows how politics works. I know how policy works. I've sat in meetings where you watch paint dry, and I know how this all works. So, and I can communicate. But then my family will leave me. And I like them. Thank you.
Well, and just a reminder, the film opens theatrically July 13th at the AMC Empire, but it is actually available now if one has DirecTV.
If you have DirecTV, you can watch it.
You can watch it and tell other people. But I just want to say, we know Rob Reiner primarily as an actor and director, but it has become eminently clear tonight that you are one of the most passionately engaged citizens. And it is for that reason that I'm especially grateful.
We gotta keep
Thank you.